McQuestion, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
Well, welcome to the program. I'm Dennis McQuestion, and sitting next to me is my co-host, Jim Falk. Jim, welcome back to the program.
Always good to be here with you, and this certainly is a timely topic.
Well, you think impeachment isn't timely? I can't imagine why you say that, but perhaps it is. Perhaps it is. You know, impeachment of a president is fortunately very rare, but the subject is on the minds, as Jim said, of most Americans today. But what do the founders mean when they listed treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors? You're about to find out as we look at previous impeachment inquiries and examine the politics and process of impeachment. So let's meet our experts. First on my right is Matt Wilson. He's Associate Professor of Political Science at SMU, where his focus is on elections, public opinion, religion, and politics. I want to congratulate you for getting all that together, Matt. I really do. And sitting next to you, Jim Riddlesberger. He's Professor of Political Science at TCU and the author of 9 books, including one on Texas politics. So, Jim, welcome to the program.
Delighted to be here.
While we are talking about this on a current basis, the real fact of the matter is that I think the average person, including probably the two of us, doesn't really know what the historical perspective is. Take us back to the beginning. What does the Constitution say about this thing? What about this process that we're talking about here?
Okay. Well, I'll try to be brief because, as you know, much has been written about this over the years. So if you ask political scientists to go into this kind of a question, we often will wander off into the weeds, and I'd rather stay in the center of the idea. The bottom line is that the framers of the Constitution were scared of executive power. They were scared of a demagogue president, and they were scared of a tyrant. Those are the words that you hear them writing, if you hear through writing, over and over again. And so they wanted to have a check against a too powerful president, a president that ignored the constraints of the Constitution. And James Madison first only envisioned it to be the first 2 charges, treason and bribery. And what they had in mind, of course, at that time was the case of Benedict Arnold during the Revolutionary War, which was kind of the only example that they had of that kind of treasonous behavior. And it was George Mason from Virginia that said, oh, no, we need a more general check on the president. And he was the one that added the or other high crimes and misdemeanors, which comes from British history, and it means crimes that are committed by the sovereign. In other words, a high crime can only be committed by someone in executive authority, and therefore it is not a crime in the sense that we think of a violation of the criminal code. It's a violation of the constitutional constraints of the president, and that was the idea that they had, but they wanted a very broad power to constrain the president, because remember, Article 1 of the Constitution is the congressional article. All of the powers of the national government are listed in Article 1, Section 8. The framers didn't like executive authority, and they wanted to constrain it to the best degree that they possibly could. And that's the origin of impeachment. Now, the process is a 2-staged process.
But before you get there, let me just interject and ask, James Madison and others were particularly concerned about foreign influence, weren't they?
That is correct. And that makes this case, the case of President Trump right now, far more typical of what the framers thought would be issues of impeachment than any of the prior ones that had to do with domestic politics.
Because we were a new republic, and they were understandably concerned what Great Britain England might try to do.
Or other international powers, of course. Yeah. So the process has 2 stages to it. Impeachment is actually only the bringing of charges, and it is done by the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives determines if there are sufficient grounds to bring charges against the president. And if they do that, that is called impeachment. If the House of Representatives votes for impeachment articles, that never happened in the case of Richard Nixon, for example. Nixon resigned before there was a vote in the House. The only two presidents who have been impeached have been Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. Then, once those charges, those impeachment charges come forward, then the second stage of the process is to hold a trial in the United States Senate. And in that trial, the Chief Justice of the United States will be the presiding entity, and the senators will act as the jury.
So the articles are essentially an indictment. Is that right?
The articles of impeachment are, well, if we were to compare them to a criminal charge, and again, I think that's appropriate, but it's not the same thing, because this doesn't have to do with anything other than removing a president from power. It doesn't have to do with going to prison or paying fine or anything of the sort. It's just removing the president from power. And by the way, at the time of the writing of the Constitution, you understand that most of the framers thought that the vice president would probably be the president's chief opponent. So there was no notion that if the president was removed, that another member of his own political party would become president. They understood that it would go to probably the leader of the opposition, which would have been a much more likely outcome under the original Electoral College.
And am I right that this was one of the most hotly discussed items at the Constitution? It was very hard for them to agree.
It was, but everything having to do with presidential power and the limitations on presidential power was a hot topic at the Constitutional Convention.
Mm-hmm. And Matt, given what he's just said, I think even though our viewers are smarter than any other television viewer, we know that, we got that. The average person on the street, it seems to me, doesn't understand at least the second half of what he's talking about here. They just see impeachment, the process that goes on right now, as something that can remove somebody from office. What do we need to understand about it on a day-to-day basis? And give us those examples of Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton would be good examples.
Sure. So impeachment is something that is done strictly by the House of Representatives, can be done by a majority vote, and it is a statement by the House that they believe that the president has engaged in serious misconduct. That does not remove the president from office. That would have to be done by the Senate, who, based on an impeachment that's been done by the House, conducts a trial, and if 2/3 of the senators agree, can remove the president from office. That has never been done. Both in Andrew Johnson's case and in Bill Clinton's case, a majority of the House of Representatives voted to impeach them, that is, to accuse them of serious misconduct, but the Senate fell short of the 2/3 that would have been required.
How close was the vote with Johnson?
Johnson was saved by a single vote. Bill Clinton was around 50 votes for impeachment. It was about a 50-50 proposition, well short of the 2/3 that would have been required to remove him from office.
But one of the things about this, it seems, at least especially now, it really becomes partisan. And when you have a Senate that is essentially equal, or now we have, 53 Republicans, and that's why with the Trump situation, which we don't know what's going to happen when the show is aired, but we assume at this point that it's going to be a partisan vote.
Yes, it's likely to be a partisan vote in the House. It's likely to be a partisan vote in the Senate as well. One of the things that's worth noting historically is that the reason that Richard Nixon resigned before this process could play out is that Republicans in the Senate came to him and said, "We can no longer support you, Mr. President." And so it became clear that a significant number of members of his own party were willing to vote to remove him from office, at which point he decided to resign before that could play itself out. In the Clinton case, you never had a significant number of Democrats jumping ship from Bill Clinton, and thus far, in President Trump's case, you have not had any significant number of.
A lot of people would say that the Democrats always stick together, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, whereas the Republicans, well, the unorganized party or whatever it may be, don't do that. But it seems to me that if your particular area of